Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party actually managed to come first place in a polling question this week, but I don't think it's going to be one that they're beaming with pride about and pinning to the front of their refrigerator, because this question from Ipsos effectively asks Canadians, which political party do you hate the most? So this is the results from the Ipsos poll. The Liberals scored 32% on a question that read, is there a party you would never consider voting for next election? And they specifically spell never in all caps to make it like a definite never. Not that I just don't prefer them to other parties. I specifically never will consider voting for them in this next election. And someone might try and point out, well, the Liberals only scored 32% on this poll, and the Conservatives were only 5 points behind. But what you have to remember is in a country like Canada, the Liberals are kind of like the in-the-middle party. Out of all the relevant parties, like not counting like the PPC and other small parties, the Conservatives are the most right party. And the Liberals are between the Conservatives and the NDP and the Greens. And so if you're not voting NDP or Green, you're naturally then probably going to vote Liberal. Or if you're not voting Conservative, the next most logical party would be voting Liberal, just based on, a political spectrum kind of view of how politics works. And with 32%, basically a third of the country saying that they will never vote for you, that is scary if you are supposed to be the moderate Liberal Party. And it's because they are no longer the moderate Liberal Party. They are almost indistinguishable from the radicalism that tends to possess the NDP. They have different policies on certain issues, but their intensity and their need to change things and meddle with things is the exact same type of mentality towards public policy. And so this is a horrible result for Justin Trudeau. And also remember, the Conservatives are only 5 points behind, but this is in a country where the legacy media is paid by the Liberal government, and they trash the Conservatives all day long, and still only about a quarter of Canadians won't consider voting for the Conservatives, but a third of Canadians won't consider voting for the Liberals in what is supposed to be a default Liberal country. It's so pathetic. Here's another good result from the same pollster. And they show that Poilievre is absolutely dominating Justin Trudeau on the preferred prime minister polling. But Pierre Poilievre is at 35% for preferred prime minister, with Justin Trudeau at 18% and Singh at 14%. So the gap between Justin Trudeau and Jagmeet Singh is only 4%, but the gap between Justin Trudeau and Pierre Poilievre is 17%. That is an absolute clocking for Justin Trudeau. And they're still 22% unsure. The preferred prime minister polling is always a little bit unsure because there's always people who only know who Justin Trudeau is because they're not too into politics. So unless you have been a party leader for 6 or 7 years, people don't really know your name. And so Poilievre getting 35% really demonstrates that his base has been solidified. I'll show you what the top line numbers were, because this is reflecting that Abacus data is not an outlier, showing the Conservatives at 20% leading the Liberals. The Conservatives in this Ipsos poll were at 43%, with the Liberal Party at 24%, and the NDP at 19%, with the Bloc at 8%. And the Bloc at 8 is actually important because the Bloc ended at 7% in this last federal election, or a little bit above 7%. I think if you round it up, it's technically the same. But the Bloc has actually been gaining, so that means that they might start stealing some other Liberal ridings in Quebec. And that's why the Liberals have no chance of winning. They have no province that they're ahead in. Yes, the Conservatives aren't ahead of the Liberals in Quebec, but the Bloc is still leading the Liberals in Quebec. So the Liberals have literally not a single province, maybe outside of PEI, that they have the highest, or they have the plurality of the vote. It's absolutely pathetic to witness. And this brings me to wanting to just quickly talk about Ipsos polling and Frank Graves. I tend to generally trust pollsters. Pollsters are in the business of trying to accurately predict the next election's results so that they can market themselves to companies as being very accurate in their market research, so that they will get paid to do market research for different products and services, because these pollsters actually usually do their political polling for free unless a party or other entity paid them to do it just because they want more in-depth numbers. But Frank Graves, he's hyper left-wing. He thinks Pierre Poilievre is an autocrat, he's a dictator, all this stuff. He's out of his mind. And so I've gotten to the point where I just don't believe his polling numbers, because when you see them, they're absolutely wacky. And then I want to talk to you about him getting mad at me for making slight criticisms of what his polling numbers were showing. So Frank Graves shows in his report that he still hasn't released. It was supposed to come out today, but it's delayed until tomorrow. Fair enough. He said that his top line numbers were the Conservative Party at 36.2%, the Liberals at 26.6%, and the NDP at 23.9%. Now, I don't believe these poll numbers. And again, it's not because I don't like them, so I don't believe them. When I say that polls need to be backed up by social data, I mean, to a reasonable person, does this polling number seem to reflect the mood in the country? Has any negative or positive news stories broken that would justify this polling deviating from what we've been seeing from other pollsters this much? So the Conservatives are only barely leading the Liberals compared to the other polls. So in Abacus, they're leading them by 20 points. In this poll, they're leading them by less than 10 points. And what also really throws me off and shows me that this poll is probably not accurate is the NDP at 23.9%. The NDP is broke. And most polls, like this Ipsos one, showing them at 19%, 18. Every once in a while, they score 20. NDP at 24, that's an outlier. That is a definite outlier because outside of the Jack Layton years, the NDP never got close to those results, especially with Jagmeet Singh at the helm. The NDP is floundering. So the idea that somehow the NDP is ascendant right now is insane. And think about it this way, too. Aaron O'Toole got like 34.3 or so percent of the vote. So with Pierre Poilievre now leading the party, somehow the party has gained less than 2% in the polls, according to Frank Graves. And the guy hasn't done a poll in 6 months. I think the guy's getting a little bit rusty. Someone might need to put some oil on his hinges. And then he came back at me when I pointed out that maybe your poll numbers might not be correct because these seem like fairly odd numbers considering the current mood in Canada on policy, on the economy, on social issues. It's all leaning conservative and not leaning conservative like the Conservatives have gained 1% of people. No, it feels like the Conservatives have gained anywhere from 10 to 20% over what they were used to be scoring. So going up to the mid 40s or low 40s, that feels like where the Conservatives are at. And again, I'm not just saying because I feel that way because I'm a conservative and I want them to do well. I'm saying that because that's just what it looks like. It obviously is how people are talking out there. And Frank Graves got back to me after I made this mild criticism, and he says, well, in the 2021 election, I was only 0.1% off on what the Liberals got in the election. Our last poll was within 0.1% of what the Liberals actually scored. And I looked it up, and yes, in the last three polls that Ipsos did, Frank Graves had the Liberals within 0.1 to 0.3%. That was very accurate on the Liberals. He's good at polling Liberal people, but he was off of what the Conservatives got by 6.5 to 7% in all of his last three polls. And it wasn't good before that either. I was just only looking at the last three polls when people are supposed to be more decided. So if anything, polls actually tend to get more accurate the closer you get to the election. 6.5% to a 7% miss is crazy. That's the entire election. He was predicting that the Conservatives might only get 26.7 to 27.3% of the vote. No, the Conservatives got 34%, and that's with O'Toole like a dead mule leading them. They somehow still got 34%. But no, I'm not going to believe Frank Graves' numbers when he missed the entire election. I don't care if you were in a decimal point of the Liberal numbers. If your Conservative number is off, that's massive. My friend Chris from the Great Canadian Bagel podcast, he pointed out when you actually looked at all of the other the parties that Frank Graves got off in that election, he had like an average error rate of like 10% misallocated points. You might as well just be drawing numbers out of a hat at that point if you're that off of one of the major parties. He was effectively predicting a pretty big Liberal Party majority, even though he was only saying that they were going to get like 33% of the vote. 33%, but the Conservatives are down to 26 usually means you're picking up crazy amounts of ridings in Eastern Canada and even areas like Manitoba, Vancouver, Montreal, the Atlantic provinces. So yeah, no, Frank Graves is full of it. And I don't care about, again, I will give credence to like a Main Street poll in British Columbia showing that the BC Conservatives are only within 6 points. And you could say, well, all the other polls were showing the NDP over and above like 12% or 15%. Yes, but the mood of the province shows that there's a lot of people who have a lot of problems with the way David Eby is running things. And even the other pollsters who tend to have more of an urban bias and show the NDP still having a 10 to 13 point lead, that lead has still been shrinking in all of the recent polls they've been doing. And some of these pollsters do kind of like rolling averages. So they only poll like 300 people at a time, and they just report those 300 people, but they kind of poll more often. But their polls tend to over-exaggerate people who work downtown office jobs, who obviously lean more left and progressive. So, but Frank Graves, he's just spinning a bottle, and whatever number it lands on around the clock, that's what he makes. Like, that's what he predicts. It's insane how you can mess up polls this badly and completely miss the mood of the country. There's no shock that a man who thinks Pierre Poilievre is an autocrat and includes a disinformation and misinformation index in his polling, in which he grades party voters on how much disinformation they believe, which the definition of is you disagree with Frank Graves, pretty much. Yeah, I don't trust him. Anyways, that should be it for me today, guys. If you live in my part of Calgary, Wyatt Claypool, I'm running for the Calgary Signal Hill Conservative Party nomination. So if you live on this west side of Calgary, in the sort of, Aspen, Crestmont Valley Ridge, Curry Barracks, Coach Hill, Cougar Ridge area, go check out my website, WyattClaypool.com, the description below, and buy a membership and vote for me number one. Or you can also donate to the TNT Legal Fund, also linked in the description below in the Give, Send, Go link. We're being sued by a billionaire developer for defamation, and after 2 years, he still hasn't provided any evidence for how we defamed him. He's just trying to bully us in court for having disagreed with him and reported stuff that had already been reported before about him. Anyways, that should be it for me today, guys. Have a good one.